Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the American Masterminds Podcast.
Each episode, we invite extraordinary guests who are masters of their craft. They're innovators, entrepreneurs, and of course, motorcycle enthusiasts who have made their mark in the world.
They share their stories, insights, and hard-earned wisdom, giving you a front row seat to the strategies and experiences that shape their successes.
So sit back, grab a drink, and get ready for an exhilarating ride as we dive deep into the minds of these exceptional individuals.
Along the way, we'll uncover powerful strategies, gain fresh perspectives, and explore the limitless possibilities of what it takes to be an American mastermind. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the American Masterminds Podcast. I'm your host, Topher Sheeler. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Rob Adams.
What up, what up?
We got Alec Laned up on the soundboard here today. We love to see his hand. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I hate to do this to you, but I have to give you a quick disclaimer. It is 108 degrees today here in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Hot.
It's super hot, and we have our cameras seem to be malfunctioning due to the heat. So this would be a great time for me to plug. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Maybe this is one you do not want to miss this episode, but maybe you go and listen to it on one of those platforms, and we apologize. We'll get this fixed, and hopefully it gets a little cooler. So I'm very excited about our guest here this evening. Rob, who do we got today?
I would like to introduce my good friend, Steven Heumann. Glad to count you as a friend. This guy is an inspiration on his authenticity, the stories that he tells, and the mission that he's on to serve and to do some great things in this world. And so I'm excited to talk about the story, the books that he's written, and the adventures that he's on, because hang on tight, guys. You are in for a great story. Well, just really quickly, just get the ball rolling here. Again, we met at a BNI type of a meeting. A BNI is a business networking meeting, for those of you who don't know. And in the meeting, there was 8 people at the table. Is that about right? 8 or 6? 6 people at the table. And everyone gets to go around and tell their little story. And there'll be like an accountant and an insurance guy. Always at every table, there's at least one accountant, one insurance guy. And then Steven says, well, let's hear it. Actually, I bet you've got it dialed in now. You've been doing it for a year.
I do, yeah. So normally I would say something like, hey, I'm with Superhuman Creative. We're a storytelling company. I worked in television for 15 years doing outdoor adventure. And I'm a novelist. I've written 10 books. And I love telling people stories. And so generally that's how it would go. And then people are just like,
what?
Wait, what?
What did you just say?
Because it's something original. Where people are like, wait, I didn't know people even did that. I was like, yeah, I ghostwrite books for people, and I write books, and now I work with a board game company.
Really?
Yeah. I'm actually the CCO.
Of a board game company?
Yes.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, and so he tells this story, and it was like, I thought I had a pretty good story. I'm usually the only. There's one other charity in the group at the time, and it was a gal that would help make products out of Peru or someplace in South America. She's actually a cousin of mine. I come to find out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but she's great charity down there. But no, I was the only other charity, and so I was the only other one that wouldn't be an accountant or a insurance guy.
So he stole your thunder, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, no. What happened afterwards is I got to get to know this guy. Of all the people that I've met here at these starch type business guys, this is the most interesting person thus far that I've met, and so we became fast friends. We went to lunch, and
when I had you over to my house and
that's
showed
right.
you all the Superman stuff.
That's right.
And
yeah. That's right. So he's a huge Superman fan. The books that I read of yours are science fiction books, with the main character is Gavin Baller. And he is, I don't want to ruin the book for you, but there's some twists in this book. It's a book where you're reading it, you're like, I got this. And then there's a shift and you're like, whoa, and now I have to see what's going to happen. And so I read the second book. I'm like, okay, I know where we're going with this. And then right at the end, there was a shift. And I'm like, this guy has got me set up. Like it was like so well put together. And you read the books, and knowing you like I do, like it's interesting to hear you use. There's Gavin swears, Steven never.
Of course, never.
But Mr. Baller, he's got some profanity coming out of his mouth because he's in some high stress situations. There's dudes with plasma laser guns shooting at his house and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to hear this voice do some swears. Like that was one of my favorite parts of the book. I know that's pretty base, but you're such a good dude. It's like hearing my mom drop the F-bomb. You're like, yeah.
Oh, it's about to go down.
This is for real. And just became really great friends, and got to know your family. You came over to my house and went swimming.
Yeah.
Just a good dude. But the reason that you're here today is because the adventure. Like, how did you get into writing? Like, have you always been a creative?
I have. So even when I was a little kid, I would take my sister's tape recorder and I would record stories into it. At the time, when you're a kid, there's nothing behind that. It's just, this is what I like to do. And then as I grew older, I love comic books. I'm a huge geek. And I wanted to write comic books and I want to do all that stuff. But it was, my family is amazing. But one of the things we're not is entrepreneurs. That was not a thing. It was you got your job. You
did your job.
You did your job and then you retired
from your job.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And so even the thought of, you get a different job if you don't like your current job, like that's not something you do. That was kind of the thing. And so pursuing something like that was not something you did. So it wasn't even ever in my mind that that's a possibility. And my dad was always a little bit more like, no, you can do whatever you want. But it just wasn't a part of our family culture. When I met my wife, even when we were dating, she was always like, well, it's your storytelling, it's your writing. That's going to be the thing.
She believed in you.
She believed in me.
Yeah.
So, wait, when did you meet your wife?
So I met my wife in 1999.
And how old?
So I was 21.
21. Okay.
I had served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Brazil.
Brazil.
And I had gotten back, and I'd been home for, 4 months or something, and we met.
It was way past due. 4 months.
4 months, right? And I was that guy. I wasn't going to get married early, But I met her, and she's amazing, and she was amazing then. And she was beautiful, and it was like, okay. And so we started dating, and then we got married. And she was always like, no, it's your writing.
Yeah.
And I was going to school at the U.
Now, let me just say this. I know Becky just a little, just a smidge.
Just a little.
And when she says, no, that's the thing, it's the thing.
That's the thing.
Yeah. It's the thing. There's no, it's how it's going to be. It's like someone should say after everything she says is, so it is, and so it is.
Yes.
So it is.
Because that's who she is. Like if she's got an intuition, it's right.
It's right.
And so I like sometimes, it'll be a circumstance where she'll say like, hey, I feel like we should buy this thing and it's going to cost $1,000 or whatever. And as soon as she says that, I'm like, well, okay.
You deemed it so.
Yeah, it's like I trust you. Nothing's ever gone wrong. You run the finances and you're really, really good at it.
Yeah.
And so if you say that we need to do this thing and we have the money for it, then it's out of my mind. I'm good.
Go.
And it's always worked out. So I wish that I knew now what I knew then, because then things would have happened more quickly.
Trust the Becky.
Exactly. But I was going to the U and I was studying communication and broadcasting.
Okay.
Because I have an okay radio voice.
Sounds
Let's hear
fantastic.
it. Give us
Right?
the
So
NPR
especially when
voice.
you got a good the NPR voice.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 1.2% today. So I knew I had a good voice. And I had a radio show at the U. And so I was like, well, I'm going to get into radio. That makes sense. So I needed an internship in order to graduate. So I applied for an internship at KUER. And then I also applied for an internship with a television production company that I had never heard of, but they were looking for interns. And I was like, okay, I'll apply to both of them. And the television one got in contact with me first. And so I went down and I took that internship. The next day I heard from KUER. And I was like, oh, I already got my internship. Thanks. And that's what set me on the path, because I interned for that production company. And then they hired me freelance to write. And then they hired me full time. And then I was running the company. And
wow,
that's kind of how the progression went. And we were an independent production company, and we produced multiple television shows. The primary one is At Your Leisure, which is an outdoor adventure show on ABC.
I've seen that.
Everybody's seen it at least once.
Yeah.
And so that's what we produced. I did on camera. I did voiceover. I was behind the camera most of the time. I ran the production company. I was the senior producer. And the owner, Chad Booth, he was my mentor. And he had worked in television. He had been in Pennsylvania, back in the 80s and was on PM Magazine, which was a huge deal. And he had started this, and he was a good storyteller, and he kind of taught me how to properly report, how to properly be to tell a story on television. Because in news, you'll notice this now. I'm going to ruin this for you. Television news sucks. I hate television news, period. In truth, if you watch television news, you are more likely to get all the facts of any individual story wrong.
Really?
You are. This is 100% proven. And there are some that are worse than others, but in general, television news is just not an effective way to consume news, because it's much more ego-driven. It's everybody wants to be somewhere else, not where they are. A reporter wants to be an anchor. And they're constantly moving and shifting. It's very political. It's very backstabby. And he was like, if you pay attention to reporters and to what they're reporting, you'll have the interview subject who actually experienced what it is that they're reporting on. And the reporter will almost always steal the best quotes. So for example, you have a person, let's say that there was a fire and they ran in and they rescued a child. And the person would say, so I saw that the house was on fire, and then I ran inside and I grabbed the kid and I came out. Well, the reporter, the story would start with that person saying, I saw that the house was on fire. And then the reporter would say, and then he ran in and he rescued the kid.
Oh my
so
God.
They steal the top
That is true.
lines. It is true.
That is true. I have noticed that before.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why television news is not necessarily enjoyable to watch for the stories. It's very forgettable, which is why you get all the facts wrong.
Because they're not really delivering with authority. They're egoing the story rather than actually, this is what happened. This is my experience. Wow.
Yeah. And Chad taught me that's the opposite of how you're supposed to do it. You are supposed to give all the power to the subject because it's their story, not yours.
Right.
You are there to fill in the gaps.
Facilitate.
That's all.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons why the stories on At Your Leisure were very good, because that's what we focused on. So
You let them tell their story.
yes, it's their story to tell, not yours. And you become the medium through which it passes so that it's enjoyable to watch.
You'd ask the questions. You would like, okay, I see where you're going with that. And your real skill was to direct the storyteller.
Yeah. And then I started, as I grew better and better, I started to realize that I didn't have to be in there at all as the reporter. Generally, for most of our stories, so the show was magazine style, so you had hosted segments, then you had individual stories. And in the individual stories, you needed to have a reporter. Sure. That's all there was. So I was the reporter generally for the travel adventure. And I'd do on cameras, and I would write it and do the voiceover. But I got really, really good at being able in the other segments to completely remove the narrator, so that the individual, the one or two or however many we were interviewing, they were the ones who were telling the story. And I was able to edit it together in a very natural way that they were completing each other's thoughts. And it became a very powerful way to tell a story.
Interesting.
And most people can't do it. It's a harder way to do it. And I just, in my brain, whatever, it was very natural for me to do it. I was just like, okay, this is, and I think it was probably because at the beginning, Chad kind of taught, no, this is how it's supposed to go. And so I was taught right from the very beginning. And so once I started moving into that, it became very easy to do. And so once it came time for me to leave At Your Leisure, where I was just kind of like, professionally, I felt like I wasn't growing. I wanted to do something else. Like the company was a little bit stagnant, and it just didn't feel like the right place anymore. And so Becky and I, we just were kind of like, well, what are you going to do? And I wasn't going to go into news because news is terrible.
That,
yeah, I was like, and we were independent, so we didn't have to deal with most of that stuff. Like, we had to work with them on certain things, and we had friends there, but we didn't run things that way. So I was like, I'm not going to do that. And so we started talking about, well, what do we want to do? And I had written my first book, my first science fiction thriller novel, and I had gotten into the author community. And we were just kind of like at that place where it was like, well, what if we took a risk and we became entrepreneurs? We started our own company. And I was like, okay, so what would that look like? What would I want to do? And I decided, well, I would want to do the things from TV that I actually enjoy. And I don't enjoy commercials, and I don't enjoy fakery. Like, I love movies. I'm a geek. I love movies, but they're telling a different type of story.
Right.
I wanted to tell very real stories. I'm more of when it comes to telling stories, I like documentary because that's real.
Sure.
And I like it when you have a documentary where you don't have a voiceover, where you're just able to allow the people to tell the story themselves. And that comes down to the edit and how things are going together and the nuances between that. And so I was like, well, I would rather do that. I would rather write my own books and have that outlet to be able to tell my stories that I want to tell. And then I'll help other people tell their own stories. And so we started with just the video side, and then it evolved into the ghostwriting side, which has really been the engine for that part of the business for the better part of the last 3 years. Because of the fact that there's a lot of people who can do video, not necessarily the way that I do it, but video is everywhere. It's not difficult. Everybody thinks that they can do video because you have a camera on your phone.
Right.
And so it's not seen as most people, oh, well, my cousin does it and I'll hire him. But when it comes to the ghostwriting, where I'm actually writing a book for someone, not fiction, this is nonfiction. So this is the actual person's story, just like how I do with video. It's the actual person's story. And I'm just the medium that story is passing through. And I tell their story, whatever it is. I've done every kind of book you can imagine. Just straight up memoirs to business tomes to parenting books, all that sort of stuff. And that's what I always tell them. I was like, they're like, oh, do you take credit? Do you do? And it's like, no, I don't. You pay me to do it, and then it's yours because it's not my story. I have no ownership over your story.
So how does that work? You say, I know what a ghost. Actually, you know what? I don't actually know what a ghostwriter does.
You asked that. Like, what is the? I know what they like.
So, are you actually
listed.
Are you interviewing them and then telling the story? Are you taking their outline and flushing it out? Like, what does that look like?
So it can be both. Generally, what it is that I run it the exact same way that I would run a story. So if I was doing a story on TV, if I was doing the video, right, I would sit down with you and I would interview you. And then I would take that and I would manipulate everything, putting it together in a way that makes it so that the pacing of it is good and that everything works. And that would be for, like a 5-minute little cut or up to an hour, however, whatever it is that somebody wants. Well, with the book, it's the same thing. It's just a much more drawn out process. So let's say that most of the time I'm going from full inception all the way through publication with some people. I have some people where they have a finished manuscript, and it'll be like, oh, this just needs an edit, which is X amount of money, and we can publish from there. Or I've had people where I just got done with one, and he got me his manuscript, and I was like, this has all of the facts. He was writing a book on how to properly walk as an elderly person, because he's a marathoner. He founded the International Association of Marathoners. And he's a doctor. And so all of this stuff, he was like, this is how you do it. So I read the book and I was like, okay, it's very dry. There is none of you in the book at all.
No story.
No. And that's what we need to change. So we can use this as a base, and then we're going to do the interviews, and it won't be as involved and it won't be as expensive. And that's how we're going to do it. We're going to add you to this so that this is actually readable, because right now it's not. It's so dry.
So here's Dr. Walkwell, and he wants you. He's got this book, his baby, and you're going to go in and you're going to throw some criticism on there. Like, how are you building the rapport or the trust is really what it is for him to be like, okay, let's do it your way. Because a lot of these people, creatives, are very, no, this is how I see it. This is my vision. Like, how would you work with them on that?
So I don't criticize. I'm a very honest person. I like to be very authentic. And that's the thing that I push for people, is that you need to be authentically you. Don't try to be somebody else, because you are wonderful and beautiful just as you are. And your story has value just as it is. Because no matter how many mistakes you've made, you're going to be able to talk about those mistakes and help someone avoid those mistakes. That's the whole point, right?
It's part of the story.
So I'm just very honest with people, where I'm like, here's what I would do and what we can do in order to make it happen. But most of the time people don't have anything. They're just like, this is kind of what I want. And right off the bat, I'm just like, this is how I would do it. This is how I would break it down. And I get them that stuff. And then generally I'll be like, we can do a chapter, and I'll get you that chapter, and then you read it. And if it works, then it works. Most of the time after the first meeting, just naturally developed a trust where I've had very few people where they're like, let's do a chapter and I'll just pay for that chapter and then we'll go from there and see if I like it. Most of the time they're like, no, let's go. Let's do it.
They're in.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. All right. So now we see ourselves, we've kind of come through the early stages out of school. I got this internship. It's turned into this amazing opportunity. I've learned all these amazing things. And you're into this place now where you're ghostwriting and doing all these different things. I've read 3 of the, you say 10? 11. 10. 3 of them, and it's all in the one series. Do you count those as 3 books?
So yeah, so that's the only series. So I have that series, and then I have a second series that I'm working on the 3rd book for.
Is it? And
then all the others are standalone.
Is it a Gavin Baller series, or
it's not? It's not. I have the other 3 books for Gavin Baller like in my brain.
Yeah.
Of where they would go.
I'd love to talk about that sometime.
Oh,
I've got questions.
I love Gavin Baller as a character, and I love like the Dream Forger series, which is one I'm currently working on. Like that's the one that I couldn't have written it unless I'd written everything else.
So it builds these things.
Yeah, well, your skills build and your storytelling build, and you just get better at everything. And so I'm glad that I waited, but at the same time, it's like that was the series that it doesn't require any like description. Like I can give you the tagline for it, and people are like, "Oh, okay, I'll buy it." Whereas the Gavin Baller series, I love that series, but it requires a little bit more of a. I needed to do a little bit more description because it's very rich and but it's not as straightforward as it sounds on paper. It's really not good fiction is always about more than what it's about. And I take that to heart, where it's like, okay, this book can be enjoyed on multiple levels. It can be enjoyed just as an adventure of Gavin Baller, this famous actor, being cocky and
kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's the development of this character. And that was my next question is like, as you're developing these characters, like, is this something like just comes to you when you're in the shower? Like, or like, is this years and years of like thinking about this character, or does it kind of reveal itself as you're moving through the story?
So I always know where the character begins and where they end. And how I plot things out is that once I've kind of got this is where they need to begin and this is where they need to end, I'll spend a day and I'll plot out the book chapter by chapter with just more or less, this is kind of what happens. And
so a rough outline. Yeah,
just a rough outline. But it allows me to know that the pacing of the book is good before I even start it, because I know where here's some action and we need a break, and here's some action we need a break, or there's too much talking here. I can see that before I even start writing the book.
Wow.
Is that crazy?
That is wild.
Can you organize material at that level?
Yeah, and so it allows me to do that. And then when I start writing, it always skews. Where they start out exactly where we started, but they always
it
takes its own path. And most of the time it'll come back to where I need it to go.
No kidding.
So
like the path, like deviation could be like, we're diving into the backstory of the heroine now, or and that's your deviations that you weren't maybe expecting.
Well, and sometimes it's just characters interact differently, and you'll get to a moment where you're like, oh, well, what I had planned isn't going to work. The characters aren't going to allow it. Because sometimes you'll get in there where you've got something happening and a character is doing something, and you know the character well at that point, and then suddenly you're like, well, why would they do that? They wouldn't do that. They would do something. They would do something different.
Yeah.
And so then it changes things, or you just get to where. So like, this won't give anything away, but I always knew that at the end of the first Gavin Baller book that he would leave the Earth. I always knew that the adventure was going to continue off of planet. The whole first book, aliens and all takes place on Earth. And I knew that from moment one. But the reason he was going into space changed from what my original notes were.
No kidding.
Yeah. Huh. And who he was going to have to go after changed.
No kidding.
Because everything was just fluid. And then when I wrote the second one, like I knew where his character needed to go, because by the end of that second one, he still was Gavin, but he needed to be serious at that point. Things happened in that book that at the end of that book, he was now, okay, I have to be something more than what I was before. I can no longer do this. And there's a part in that second book where there's battles going on and he's having to make decisions that are pretty brutal. Some that he would never have thought of. Some of the decisions that people don't want to make between life and death of who lives and who dies. And so it's like at the end of that, he needs to be in a different place. And then in the third book, which is my favorite, I knew that there was going to be a major twist in that book.
The Return of the Jedi, as it were. Like he's a fully developed, this is who I am, this is my power, and he steps into it so well. It's like, it's amazing.
Oh, and then I've got this moment where things flip, and suddenly you're like,
wait a second.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then it reframes everything before. And so suddenly you're just like, oh my gosh.
That makes sense now.
You are kidding me.
Yeah.
I thought that in these last two books that these were all the reasons behind everything that was going on. And then you're like, oh my gosh, no. And I remember that because I was getting chills when I was writing it, this moment. I was so excited to write this moment. I was just like, this is going to be awesome. Like the second that he sits on the throne and goes, because it's mine.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, this makes no sense to anybody, and that's good. Yeah. But the moment that happens, and then they have the next chapter, which is all the conversation, and you're just like, oh my gosh. And you see that character's perspective of just how, and you reading it, I wanted people to walk away and just be like, dude, he's like totally not wrong. Yeah. Like he knows what he's talking about, and he's right.
Yeah. I listened to that chapter. It's interesting that you point that out. That chapter, like after he sits on the throne, I listened to it. I like backed it up and like, wait a second. I listened to it twice because I'm like, did that just happen? Was I distracted? Because it's like such a hard left turn or right turn, whatever you want to call it. It's such a hard turn that you're just like, wait a second. That changes the color of the whole book. And this guy's he's a tool. At the beginning of the book, I almost didn't make it through the first book because I'm just like, I've got to like the guy, at least even the bad guy. I've got to even maybe just like the bad guy. I didn't like any of them. They were all douche canoes, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's funny. Like that's something, like he had it coming. You know what I mean? Like this guy, he gets served and humbled and grows, and oh man, it's awesome. One of the things I got to ask you this.
Yeah,
I've wanted to ask you this actually since I read the book. This is awesome. This is a great gig, dude. These are questions that I'm going to ask people. There's a point in the book where they are actually growing their spaceships. It's an organic, it's a plant.
Yeah.
And they grow these spaceships that can travel through space, and they have it's this little pod, and then they mold this organic material, this giant pod, seed, whatever you want to call it.
It's kind of like an onion. That's how they kind of describe it at one point. It's like this really ugly onion.
And then then that becomes their spaceships, and it responds to what they want. There's not buttons and levers like you would imagine. Like they put their hands in there, and the onion responds to what? Yeah, dude. And so, how the hell did you come up with that?
So when I sat down to do this series, I wanted it to be way different from anything else. I didn't want it to be, because so often when it comes to like space operas, it feels like a knockoff of something else. It's Star Trek or it's Star Wars.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. And you see the ships, it's like, okay, that's Star Wars, that's Star Trek. And this one I was like, okay, well, if I were to take something that's completely different, then how would I do it? And I thought, well, what if I just made everything very naturalistic? And I just took the natural world and laid it on top of everything. So instead of having like hyperdrives and stuff, they just know how to travel on basically rivers of gravity through the universe that we have no understanding of, that we can't see because we're not out there. And so they can travel at plus light year speed because they know these rivers of gravity. And then I was like, and so what kind of ships would they have? If this is all naturalistic, I was like, well, they would grow them. They would know how to do this. So the crux of the entire series is that there's very few intelligent life forms, almost none. It's very, very rare. And there's one, they're called the perennials, the Ashandasa, and they are really old. They've been around they've had an advanced civilization for hundreds of thousands of years. Yeah. And they've found that every intelligent species gets to a point where it destroys itself. Every single one. And so their entire purpose is to try to find these and just try to make that not happen. And so in the first book, you find out that the entire Earth is actually quarantined. Like there's only there's only 4 intelligent species in the entire galaxy. 4.
Oh my goodness.
And the perennials have quarantined the Earth because the Earth is a fear factory. We are just a species that thrives on fear. It is our base instinct. We are afraid.
Our default.
As a species, we are.
Yeah.
And they were just like, okay, they are not ready. And they're not going to be ready for a while. And so they went back. So 1,000 years ago when they found us, they took like 1,000 people from this African tribe that were prime physical specimens and that had an intelligent, and they brought them with them. And so over 1,000 years, there are humans who live in this galactic commonwealth. And so they're well known, but everybody knows you don't go to Earth because it's a fear factor. It's just that they have, and
it's
they
like
talk about,
almost like a game reserve.
Yeah, where it's just like they aren't ready and we cannot have them infect the other species.
Unsafe.
It's dangerous enough with what we're trying to do to keep these other 3 civilizations alive. We can't have that. And so that's the sort of thing, that's the overarching premise of what's going on in the universe. And so like that's the title of the second book is Empty Universe. Because I wanted to play around with the fact that there's nothing out there, man. Space is space.
Yeah.
And so the book starts out and they've been traveling for 11 months. And
at hyperspeed.
Yeah.
Fast.
And as far as Gavin is concerned, the view outside the window has not changed. And so it's like there's just nothing out there. There's nothing. And I wanted to play with that. I think the name of the first chapter is Star Trek Lied. Because he's so pissed. He's like, man, they were running into stuff everywhere. Like, I am bored.
Yeah.
And that's his whole problem, is that he's just bored.
He talks about life on this organic ship where he's walking around and there's nothing to do, nothing to see. And it's well written because you're just like, this is terrible. This is a terrible existence for 11 months to have really nothing to do except for go there.
How do you, okay, I gotta ask, how do you come up with it? How do you come up with the rule set and there's only 4. There's only 4 intelligent species. How do you do all that?
For me, it's really all about looking at what's already out there. You know, we've all seen movies and we've read stories, and you look and you say, okay, there's cliches, and you can follow the cliches, and people are comfortable with them. It's like, or you can throw a wrench in it. And if you're going to throw a wrench in it, it has to be well written. And like I've had people just like Rob where they read through the first couple chapters and they're like, oh, I know where this is going.
Yeah.
And they get to chapter 3 and they're just like, what?
Yeah, hold on.
And because that's how I do. I'm like, I don't follow those tropes. I try to have my dialogue be very realistic. And I try to have it be that the characters respond in the proper way that they would respond in real life. Like that it's not like, oh, well, why did they do that? Why didn't they just do this? I hate that. It's like, no, you have to, you don't want to be plot driven. You want to be character driven inside the plot. And so then you look at it and say, okay, the reason that you're not plot driven is because your character has agency and is making choices, and they're making realistic choices. You know, it's like so let's talk about today. So today is plot, right? So Rob arrived here on a motorcycle, but it's 108 degrees outside. So the reason that he rode on the motorcycle, for the plot, he had to ride the motorcycle because the next thing that's going to happen has to do with the motorcycle, right?
Sure.
You had to give him a reason because normally no one in their right mind is going to do that in that heat. Well, his reason is that his truck broke down. So you've got to think about those sorts of things where it's like, okay, the plot requires something to happen here. That's why it's the plot.
A trigger.
Yeah. You can't just have nothing happen. That's not how books work. But it's got to make sense. And so if somebody's got to be on a motorcycle for the plot to progress, then you've got to have a reason for it.
For them to be there.
Yeah.
Something interesting about the Audible. I listen to a lot of Audible. I read a lot of books. I love to read. I love to listen to books. I reference books a lot. I like
every day. There's another one that I got to read.
It's true. Today I had one like, you have to read this book. Like, of the books I've recommended, this is a must read. And he's like rolling his eyes like, you say that every time. So that being said, I'm a little bit of a Audible snob. I will only listen to 10 or 15 minutes of a book, and if the narrator of the story isn't delivering with talent, or so some of the things I like is you had Gavin Baller's voice, and then there was her voice, and then there was this guy's voice, and you had a different cadence and tonality with it. That's a whole different, Steven, that's a whole different skill set. And so when you sat down and you're like, okay, here's the list of characters that I have, and this is what Gavin Baller sounds like. And he kind of had a little bit of a swagger in his voice, you know what I mean? Like, the guy was a douche. Like, he sounded like a douche. Like, I immediately did not like Gavin Baller. But by chapter 3, my window, I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. How do you do that? How do you keep the voices straight? And when you were doing the recording of it, did you like have to like stop and be like, oh yeah, that's Gavin's voice? Or were you able to like flow in character?
Normally I can flow. So I've read my children lots of books. So the Lord of the Rings books and the and like Harry Potter and stuff. So we've read all those out loud.
And do you Hagrid's voice? You do
I
those?
I do. And I do Dumbledore, but he's always Richard Harris, no matter what.
Let's hear it.
So he's always like this, Harry. So even at the end, when it's Michael Gambon, who was in the movies, it's still Richard Harris in the books.
That's good.
So yeah, and it just
this guy.
But it's so the main character will always be my voice. I will not change it. I'll just add the character stuff because that's easier. They're the ones who are going to be through the most of the book. So I always give them my book. So Harry, so when I was reading the Harry Potter books, Harry did not have an accent. Harry was just me.
Gotcha.
Everyone else I will try and adapt.
Gavin wasn't you though.
It was my voice, but I had to be his character. So he had the swagger.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really altering my voice or my tone of my voice. It was just really more in the performance of it, where he would, he'd be like, hey, what's going on?
He was kind of douchey. This guy.
Because at the beginning, because I wanted him to, he's the most popular actor in the world. He's basically The Rock with long black hair. He is a perfect human specimen. In all honesty, he is a perfect human specimen.
Hair, physique, the whole thing.
And he's a really good actor. He's good at everything he does. And that plays out in the entire book as to why that is.
Third book.
Oh,
Third book, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's why. Yeah.
And so he's really good at whatever he does. And so his life, for all intents and purposes, has been easy because he doesn't respect it. But he's still good at heart. He's not a bad person.
Just cocky.
He's just cocky. He's just, I am the best that there is.
The best there is, yeah.
And he's going through this sort of crisis at the beginning where he goes, it's his birthday party. It's his 36th birthday party. And he goes to this party that's being thrown for him. And he's starting to realize the hollowness of his existence. And he's still cocky and like pampered and all of that stuff. And as the book progresses, he gets pulled out of that and he realizes that, like the tagline I always tell people is that he's the #1 actor in the universe, and as awesome as he thinks he is, he's in fact the biggest disappointment in the universe. And he realizes that by about chapter 5, like things start going, and then in chapter 5, when things suddenly get presented to him, he realizes, who am I? Yeah, am I even? So he goes from I am the greatest thing ever to am I even worth what a normal person is worth?
Yeah.
And it changes his perspective, but he's still him. Like through the entire series, he's still,
which makes him really likable. So he goes from this like guy that I would not hang out with to a guy that I'm like, okay, man,
makes sense.
I get that.
And he is a light character. No matter what's going on, that is the one thing about Gavin is that he is light.
Yeah. And
he will sometimes say things that are very funny.
Yeah.
Like,
laugh out loud funny.
You are effed up.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite, that third book, man. That is, and when I got that book to my editor and she read that chapter, like she had no notes through that entire chapter. And at the end, she was just like, I don't know what you just did, but holy crap, it was amazing. I was like, thank you so much. Because that's the most important chapter in the entire series.
Yeah. Wow. Oh man, that's awesome. Well, I think you're fascinating. The way that your brain works and you put things together, it's really cool to witness your genius in, like you stepping into your genius. I know a few people in this world, and there's not very many people that are standing in their genius, and I admire that about you. I admired that about you when I very first met you, and a little envious actually. Like I think that's amazing, because a lot of people, men, are they're struggling to find their genius. They're looking for, what is my thing? What am I good at? And I think I found mine, and in so finding it, there's a tremendous amount of fulfillment and liberation, satisfaction and happiness that comes with it. But it's really cool to meet another man that's just like, this is my thing, this is what I do, and I'm happiest when I'm doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see that, and for me, like, that authenticity is really important. Like I said, like being authentic to who you are. But I think that one of the things about our culture, and I think this is, men in general, is that we're really afraid to suck at something. Like, just own it. Own it, that I am doing something that I like, that I suck at. And I don't give a crap that you think it sucks.
But I'm going to play that horn
but I'm
loud.
Going to do it.
Yeah.
Like there's this great quote that I try to live by, and it's from Mel Brooks. So when Mel Brooks was doing The Producers back in, this is in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And they had the whole Springtime for Hitler music part.
Yes.
And he was like, and he's Jewish, right? And he was like, am I going too far? Like, this has the potential to just really rile people up and piss them off, and they won't laugh. They'll
be angry.
They'll be angry. And he said something. He said, you know what? I realized that if I was going to ring that bell, I was going to walk up and I was going to ring the hell out of that bell. I was going to ring it as loud and as hard as I possibly could. And I was going to walk away with my head held high. And so I look at that as I consider myself a good author now. I've learned a lot over the past 10 years as a novelist. When I worked in television, I wrote a lot of scripts, both documentary and film. And I won awards for those, but writing a novel is a completely different animal. And so now I'm like, I'm a good writer. I have no doubt about that. I can pump out good stuff. But for a long time, I was not. And I had to go to critique groups and get ripped into, and I had to learn all of this stuff of how to actually craft things in a way that was readable. And I had to learn all that stuff. And I had to be okay with the fact that I wasn't good, and still do it. And just be like, well, I'm still going to do it because I'm going to get better tomorrow. And I think that if we can get out of our heads of worrying whether or not we're really good at something, and just look and say, okay, what do I want to do? What is it that I feel that I'm drawn to? And if we go after that thing, we're going to suck at the beginning, and that's fine. And you might suck for years, but it doesn't matter, because if you're doing the thing that you feel confident that you should be doing, then you're gonna find joy, because you're gonna be authentic to yourself. You're not gonna be putting on any sort of mask, because we think that masks give us freedom, right? When you put on a mask, like I was talking to somebody, I was like, I can sing bass, I can sing a bass line pretty well, like in a choir.
Okay,
I can sing bass, but I can't sing other than that. But if I'm pretending to be someone else, then I can sing. And actors are that way. Like you like Bradley Cooper was in, what's it called? Star is Born, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, you sing beautifully. And he's like, no, I don't. It's like, yes, I'm the one who's singing, but it's not me. It's that character. When I was in that character, I could sing. Benjamin Bratt, who plays in Coco, who is Ernesto de la Cruz, exact same thing. He's like, Benjamin Bratt can't sing, but when I'm Ernesto de la Cruz, I can sing. So we think about when we put on masks that it gives us freedom, and sometimes it does. But if we keep that mask on for too long, then we're no longer living our authentic self. And when we're not living our authentic self, suddenly we become unhappy. And that's why actors that's why oftentimes you get into drugs. And because they're not being their authentic self, they're trying to be something that they think that they should be when, in that actor lifestyle, and they're not.
But they're incongruent.
Yeah. And so they're not getting joy because they're not doing what they actually are meant to do. And so when we stop and we think and we look at, okay, what is it that I want? And it might not be the same in 5 years. And that's fine. We're too, and I'm part of the problem, because we're too into stories. And in stories, you can't change characters too much because it feels inauthentic. If they do something that doesn't make sense, you're like, well, that's not what they would do. Unfortunately, real people do that all the time. We do that all the time. We act out of character all the time. And we change and we evolve. And so what we want now is not the same as we wanted 5 years ago. I've gotten really into, I've collected action figures for a long time. I have a beautiful collection. It's my pride and joy.
Shelf collapsing collection.
Oh, dude, it's awesome. It's amazing. I love it. But I've gotten into customizing action figures. So painting them, adding details, turning them into completely other characters. I've gotten really into it. But now I'm starting to move a little bit away from that because I've felt myself drawn toward painting. And it's like, and I know that I've got my canvases now and I got my paints, and I am going to be no good for the first while. And that is just fine. I don't care, because maybe in a few years I will be good. And I'm not doing it to be good. I'm not doing it to have my stuff hung in a gallery. That's not why. And that's not why we should make those decisions. If we're making those decisions because we want the appraisal of other people so that we can validate ourselves, then we're never going to be happy. That's why so many people are unhappy.
How long have you known this? Like, is this something you've had your whole life?
The older I get, the more it makes sense. And starting the business 6 years ago was a real catalyst, because it wasn't just about being authentic to myself, but also understanding like real faith of like, every time I've needed something, every time, and you can say it's God or it's the universe or whatever, there is some type of universal principle that when you set out to do something, and if you don't give up, you will achieve it. It's just, it is a universal principle.
We've become, it feels to me, and I'm going to sound like my dad here for a second, but we've become quitters too soon.
Yeah.
That we're not sticking with it. And I've got a boatload of instruments at home to prove it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've got a ukulele. I play poorly.
Well,
right.
But you've also got to have that drive.
Yeah.
To realize, what is it that I want? And it's okay to start something and be like, I really hate this, and put it aside. Like some people they'll talk, if my kids get into something, I'm going to force them to do it. And for me, it's like, if my kids want to try something and they don't enjoy it, then I'm not going to force them to do it. And say, okay, what's your next thing? Yeah. What's your next thing? Well, I want to try this. Okay. Because eventually they're trying to figure out who they are, just like we're as adults trying to figure out who we are.
Yeah.
And it'll be something that they can kind of gravitate towards, and eventually they're going to find it.
Yeah.
And I want them to have I would want that same freedom. Like when I was in high school, I all through my childhood, I played baseball, and I really enjoyed it. And then once I got into high school and I started playing baseball, I started really hating it, because it felt like a job. It was no longer, I was not having any fun anymore. It was, and I was pretty good. I wasn't like a star player by any means, but I was all right. But it got to the point where it was like, okay, everyone here is super serious about it, like it's going to be their life. And I started hating it. And I remember being afraid to go to my parents and say, I don't want to be on the baseball team. And I remember telling them that and saying, I want to quit. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm really not enjoying it. And having them go, okay, not a problem.
That was it?
That was it. And it was like this giant weight lifted off of my shoulders. And so it's like, as an adult, I want that type of grace of, if I want to not do something because I really hate it, I want to give that same grace to my kids. I don't want to force, if you don't want to do piano anymore, that's cool, but I want you to challenge yourself. So what's the next challenge? Oh, well, I want to do acrobatics. Okay, well, then we're going to do a year of acrobatics. And at the end of that year, then we can reevaluate. If you want to continue, you can.
Can we go back to the principle? And I'm asking, dad to dad, but how do you teach the principle of not caring more about what others think about you than what you think about you? Because I know your kids, and there's a subtle that in all of them, and I'm like, these kids are, who they are. They're discovering who they are. They are secure in their knowing. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So how do you teach that?
I think that a lot of it comes from example. A lot of it just comes from understanding that, I'm still just a little kid. I'm still just figuring stuff out. And I remember looking at my dad and my mom and thinking they had everything figured out. And then getting to the point where I was an adult, especially when I was starting my business and things were hard, and thinking about all the hard times my parents had where they were barely able to put food on the table, and realizing that I never worried about it because I was a kid. And then understanding, okay, my dad was just a dude who was trying to figure things out. And so if I'm just a dude trying to figure things out, then my kids are just dudes trying to figure things out. And so if I can say, okay, what would I want as an adult? How would I want to be treated? And what kind of grace would I want? And then I just try and offer that to my kids. And it's the same thing of the idea of we judge ourselves on our intentions and we judge other people on their actions.
We judge ourselves on intentions and we judge other people on their actions. Well, what else would we judge them on? Because we can't see anything else.
But that's the thing, is that if we're judged on our actions and not on our... So we always give ourselves grace because we understand what we were trying to do when we did something stupid and hurt someone's feelings. That wasn't our intention. Very few people are that way. There's very few really bad people in the world, but there's a whole bunch of people that are just being people, and things kind of conflict and run into each other, right? It's a complicated world. We judge ourselves on what we intended to have happen, but we don't judge other people on what they intended to have happen. We automatically add what we think they wanted, which was he cut me off on purpose because he's a jerk and he's a horrible person, as opposed to saying I've cut people off and most of the time it was a mistake because I didn't see him or whatever, or or they were going a little bit faster, whatever it is. And so I think trying to do that in our homes where we're like, okay, I'm not going to judge the intentions of the people around me. I'm going to give them the same grace that I would want. And I'm going to give them that benefit of the doubt. And if I do that to my kids, then they'll feel safe in the home. And they'll feel like, okay, I am free to make mistakes. It's okay for me to mess up. It's okay for me to not be good at something. And I think that we give way too much value to people who succeed easily. Like that they're somehow more intelligent, that much more intelligent, or that much more hardworking, or that much more talented.
Yeah, for anything. And
in truth, they're not. There's they've proven scientifically there's a huge amount of luck that goes into a lot of success. Most people who succeeded had to put their head down and work for a really long time in order to make it happen.
And fail and
learn. And then suddenly, they're an overnight success 10 years in the making.
Yeah.
But we look at the people who had the luck moment, that they had the right idea at the right moment and it worked. Because I've had people who have had wonderful ideas. One of my really good friends, Drew Tyler, almost 20 years ago, he came up with the idea of co-working. And he started a co-working space. Today, that would have taken off wonderfully. He completely crashed and burned because the idea didn't start to really jive for about 5 years after that. That's when co-working really exploded. So he had an amazing idea that 5 years later would have been a huge success, but he had it too early. And so it wasn't the idea, it wasn't the fact that he worked hard, it wasn't any of that stuff.
Wrong timing.
It was wrong timing. And he had no control over that. And so we give all of this sort of praise to individuals who had that moment, that they are this amazing thing. And we like that overnight success story.
Yeah.
But in truth, when you're an overnight success, it's really easy to think it was you and that it didn't have anything to do with anything outside of you. And then you, kind of like Gavin, you lose respect for
the process.
Yeah. And then you look at all the other people who busted their butts and worked nights and did all that stuff to succeed. And they don't get the same sort of accolades, but they're also in a better place because they did that, because they went through that. And so, so many of those principles just kind of tie together. But for Becky and I, we just wanted our kids to know that our home was always safe for them, no matter what. Because we don't have kids aren't bad or good. Kids are, they exist. And you help to mold them into what hopefully then becomes a productive adult that serves other people and that can find joy in the moments where things are hard. And so we were like, if we can create an environment where they know that they're safe and that they're safe to screw up, that they're safe to not be good at something, then when they grow up, when they become teenagers, they'll know that it's okay for them not to be good at something. And it won't be this thing where they're just suddenly like, oh, my life has fallen apart because I didn't succeed right away. They're able to look and go, oh, well, that's okay, because I didn't do it very good, but I really like this, so I'm going to try again. And then they try again, and then they succeed. And I think that for us has been a really good thing that's helped our children to succeed at a very high level. And just not to have to push them, where it's just like, if you don't like it, you don't like it, and that's fine. But I don't want you to step away just because it's hard, because if you're doing it because it's what you want, then it's gonna be hard. If you just hate it because it's terrible, well then let's reevaluate. But if this is what you want, it's gonna be hard, and that's okay.
Put in the work.
Yeah.
Man.
There's a whole list of wisdoms and golden nuggets there.
Yeah. Topher has a hard job of like withdrawing like the nuggets and making us good quotes on Facebook and social media. And sometimes we just get like, oh, there's a bunch, and good luck picking a good one out of that list of good ones. Well, what would you say is your favorite book that you've written?
Dream Forgers.
Dream Fortress.
Dream Forgers.
Forgers.
Dream Forgers.
All right, I'm writing it down. Dream.
I love Gavin Baller book 3. I do. It's in my opinion, as far as my storytelling, but it's also the third part of a series. And for me, if you're doing a trilogy, the third part is the most important part. That's why I absolutely hate Rise of Skywalker, because they didn't realize what they were doing. Where if you're going to do a third trilogy, not only is that third trilogy the third part, the climax of everything, that third movie is the most important movie of all.
It's to bring it together.
Yes. And so you've got to have control over that.
Yeah.
And if you botch that, then it doesn't matter. Like the beginning of a book is really important. The first chapter of a book, because by the end of that first chapter, you have to be like, okay, I want to keep reading.
Sets the pace.
Yeah. So it's like, I don't like this character, but things are happening and I need to see where this is going.
Yeah.
If you've achieved that by the end of the first chapter, then you're good. But in my opinion, the last chapter is the most important chapter in the book.
Yeah.
Or in any story. Yeah. Because that's where you're going. Are you going to have a cathartic moment?
Yeah. It's the dun 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 of the whole thing.
And so I really love the third Gavin Baller book because it does that. But Dream Forgers it's such a rich narrative, and it's in a world of, so the premise behind, I'll just give you the tagline. So Abby Kinder, the main character, she hunts predators in other people's nightmares, but she can't remember her enemies when she wakes up. So half of the book takes place in the real world and half of it takes place in a shared consciousness dream world that I establish that all of us experience every night when we go to sleep.
Reading it. I'm going to read that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you enter this state of consciousness when you're asleep, because and this is actual science. So I talk about this in the book, is that there is a theory of shared life consciousness.
Yeah.
That everything is tied together. And they've actually done scientific experiments where they took rats in the United States and they taught them to do something that rats have never been taught to do. They got it to where the rats were good. Then they went to France and they took the exact same species of rat and they taught it the exact same thing. And those rats were able to do it faster than the first set of rats. Then they did it a third time in like India with the exact same race of rats. These rats have no contact. They were on different continents. They taught that set of rats, again, the exact same thing. And the third group was able to do it faster than the other two.
Wow.
And so there's a scientific theory about shared consciousness, about how everyone is linked. So I decided to turn it into the dream world is this place where we go. And most people, when they enter the dream, it's in fits and spurts, and you're kind of almost like a phantom. You kind of float in and you share in the emotional world that's created in the subconscious. And that's why dreams are so weird, because you're actually sharing thoughts with other people and it's all mixed together and you don't have any memory of it. It's just these flashes. Well, there are other people who just naturally can reach a higher level of consciousness and they can be conscious in that realm. So that means that they can manipulate the realm. That means that they can become whatever they want. They can do things, they can manipulate people. And naturally, as humans do, some of them are good and some of them are selfish. And so you have an entire world that exists in this place And some people can remember it when they wake up. And so Abby Kinder she's a proctor in the dream world. So she protects dreamers from being manipulated by pursuants, who are people who are just jerks, because you can experience other people's emotional states.
Yeah.
So if you want to, like, let's say, you have two people who are having an affair. Well, you can experience that emotion. That's a powerful emotion of fear and pleasure and all of this sort of stuff. You can experience it. It's not yours, but you can experience it because you can take it from them. And so you have these people manipulating, and she's one of these proctors who protects people, but she is not at the place where when she is awake, she can remember it. So she has a normal life, 100% normal, but in the dream world, she's a badass. And so the premise is that she has learned something in the dream that people in the real world want to kill her over.
But she doesn't remember it.
But she doesn't remember it.
Huh.
And so when all of a sudden her life gets torn upside down and people are trying to kill her, she has no idea what is going on.
Huh.
And her dream self does. And then her dream self sees them as two different people. She doesn't respect her real life person. In basic is what they call it. Us here right now, we're in basic. She doesn't respect her because she wastes her life working and watching television. So she judges herself
From the dream state.
Wow. And so it deals with all of this sort of stuff, and it's so rich as you have this massive chase in the real world that's then mirrored in the dream world as she's learning things and you're learning things. So like one of the taglines on the back of the book that I was very proud of is that she begins to learn who is a threat and who is an asset, and whether or not the biggest danger of all is sleeping right next to her. And so it's a very rich narrative. And the second book then, so like I talked about earlier, good science fiction, good stories are about more than what they're about. Yeah. So Gavin Baller is actually about what it means to be human, what it means to be a human being. Particularly the first book. That's what the first book is, the underlying thing. My debut novel, Paper Heroes, is basically midlife crisis in extreme. Are you willing to give away everything in your life that's good that you don't realize for potentially something better, but you're making a bad decision to do it? That's midlife crisis, right?
Yeah.
You're risking all the good. And so it was just an extreme. And the Dream Forgers, the first book, is about understanding power, understanding your power as an individual, the impact that you can have, and not being afraid of the impact that you can have. Because I think oftentimes we are afraid of that impact. And the second book is about not fearing when you have power, not being afraid of that power. And then the third book will be about embracing that power and not using it for yourself. So so Dream Forgers and Dream Addicts, the second one, just continues that. And I'm very proud of those two books.
How exciting. Awesome. What an adventure that you're on. It's fun to talk about that and visit about it. If you could look back and see this this young creative this young man right out of BYU or University of Utah, right? Yeah. Stepping into his genius, what advice would you give him?
Live.
Come on.
No, I seriously would, because I think about, if I could go back in time, what would I change? And honestly, I talk a lot about story. I talk about we are the culmination of our story. Wherever we are in that moment, all of the stuff that's happened to us has turned us into who we are. And everything has been worthwhile, even the pain, even the trauma. It's brought you to who you are right now. And who you are right now is good. And so if we are in a state right now where we are good and we accept the fact that we're good, despite everything that's happened to us, that we've done, that's been done to us, if we realize right now, I am good and I can do good, then all of those things forged who we are. And we needed to live through them. So I think about the first couple of years of starting my business and how hard that was, and how I was failing and learning things every day, and just, getting beaten down and feeling like a failure and all of that sort of stuff. I needed to go through that. And so I always tell people, you need to live. You need to go after what it is that you feel your purpose is, and then you need to realize that that might not be your purpose in 5 years, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't. We're not static beings.
Yeah, we're always changing.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. Well, Steven, we've talked a lot about where you've been and kind of what you're doing. Where are you going? I'd like to know. That's
an interesting question. So I own Superhuman, and so we help people tell stories, right? And I've got a partner in that now, who I've brought on because I've taken an opportunity with a startup, with a board game company, and I'm applying all of my storytelling stuff to this much broader canvas, and it's been really interesting. It's been really challenging. It's been really fun to have this opportunity to be able to play on a bigger field and do the same things that I've been doing, where I'm telling my stories for the company, where we're writing books for this character of H.C. Quimbley is his name. And then also applying everything that I learned in owning Superhuman and running that and still running that to this bigger endeavor that has all the same risks as everything else I've ever done. As Superhuman, it has all the same risks. It's just on a bigger field. And we're still making mistakes. I'm still making mistakes. And learning from those and just going, okay, well, let's keep moving forward. And so, so it's a very different place to be in, of all still running my company and being an executive at Quimbley's. And it's been really, really amazing. And I feel very strongly that it's gonna succeed very well, and that we're gonna be able to bring a lot of joy to a lot of people, and create things that are just amazing. Yeah. Because I know I get into a state of like, am I doing enough to make a positive impact on the world?
It's a great question. And
I look at it, it's like we often think about, okay, it's the people who are running charities, it's the people who are going to Africa and feeding people, it's this and this and this. And I think that not all of us can do that, because we've got lives and you have to put food on the table, and you have to put a roof over your head, and all of that takes time. But I think that as we're raising our kids, as we're interacting with the people in our lives, if we can be a positive influence, even to the point where it's just your smile that's brightening somebody's day, then we're having an impact. We're making the world a better place. Because for most of us, that's where we're going to be, is that we're going to have that 10 to 20 people that we interact with that we can make their lives better. And I think that when we go on a bigger scale, oftentimes our real impact is less. We can have a real powerful impact with those people in our lives with whom we're interacting. The people at the grocery store, the people that I try to be a positive person when I'm out. And if I can give a smile to somebody, then I know that can be a powerful thing, and it doesn't cost me anything. And so I always try and just be that, where it's like, I want to be just somebody that if someone's having a hard day and I have no idea, that I can just, that kind word, I think that has so much more impact than we realize. And when we think about, I've got to do something really big, we lose out on those opportunities that are there every single day.
Agreed. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I heard in a podcast, a gal was talking about, she had a near-death experience, and she had an opportunity to learn a few things. And one of the things that she learned in her experience was that when she does a kindness here on earth, that there's a ripple effect, which, yeah, that makes sense. But she was very specific, and her ripple effects is 26 ripples. That was her number. And I thought, 26? Okay, why not? That's as believable as anything else. And then you think about the kindness that you've done, and you're nice to that person behind you in line, or whatever that is, and how that that creates a ripple, and then that creates a ripple, and so it goes. And raising the frequency of the earth, the energy of the earth. That sounded like you hippie for a second. It is the small acts of kindness that create an increased positive frequency. And the thing I like about this is it's something that you can actually do. It's not outside the imagining, because when you talk about starting a charity or going to South Africa or doing something like that, that's a tremendous amount of energy. But doing something kind starts with getting up and being kind to yourself. It gets up, getting up and going to the gym or going for that walk or spending time in meditation or prayer or scripture. And those don't take that much energy. It just takes intention.
Well, and you look at it from a physical standpoint, right? They always say that consistency beats intensity when it comes to exercise. If you exercise a little bit every day, then you're going to be over time way better off than if once a week you really push the weights hard.
Yeah.
And I see that as being sort of that thing. I can put a lot of effort toward going and feeding the hungry somewhere. But if I'm consistent every day doing these little acts, then it's going to be a much bigger impact over time than if I do that other stuff. And then hopefully I'll have those opportunities to do big things, but I can't put off the day to day. And then sometimes the more that you do it, then the more you can offer that grace to people. So like a couple of months ago, I was delivering some books in a box to the post office. And I was getting out of my car and I slipped, and I guess the box tapped the car next to me, and I didn't notice, and I went in. Well, the guy from that car was so angry that he came in and confronted me in the mailroom that I had hit his car, that I was just a jerk. And in that moment, you kind of go into flight or flight. You're like, some stranger's yelling at me in the middle of a freaking post office.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. But I was able to keep my composure, and I just apologized. I said, I'm really sorry. I didn't, I kind of fumbled the box. I'm really sorry that I did that. And he was still really mad. It wasn't one of the situations where he calmed down and he still was railing and left railing. And I was like, but at the very least, I didn't add to
the fire.
Yeah, I didn't add to that. And so hopefully my act of not adding to it, of being mature and not losing my crap in the middle of the post office, which earlier in my life I would have done. I'm not gonna kid and say that 5-10 years ago I would have been mature enough to be able to not yell back at the guy.
Yeah.
But I was able to now.
Huh.
And so then I didn't add to that, and hopefully that could have helped him to because if I had yelled at him, it would have made it worse, and he could have taken that with him. And so maybe my actions helped him to not be in that state later in that day when he got home to his kids or his wife or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's that consistency, and that's how I think you gain control over your emotions. You gain control over not losing it in those situations when it is really easy to lose it. I mean, you feel justified in losing it.
Yeah. You would have been right to do so.
That's a really cool one, because I call that living to your code. If you uphold your personal code, right, you can't control anything that anybody else around you, what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if you upheld your code and what you think your standard for yourself is, then that's something to be proud of.
Topher's one of the most self-aware people I hang out with. Like, he knows his code. Not very many people are aware of their code. They don't you have to think it up in the post office. That's too late to be thinking it up. That's when you're in trouble. I had a guy, I cut him off in traffic, and he was in a little blue sports car, and I was in my big old Dodge,
Yeah.
I didn't even see him. He was coming up quick. I just came over, and I was getting off the freeway, totally cut him off. He lost it, and he was so mad, and he had his girl in the car, wife maybe, and you could tell she was like, oh, here we go. Like, I could see she was really uncomfortable, and they pulled up right next to me. It was on 33rd South. They pulled up right next to me. I rolled my window down, and they rolled their window down, and he was like, what? And I'm like, dude, I didn't even see you. I am so sorry. I did not mean to cut you off. Will you please forgive me? And the wife was like looking at me like, what just happened? And he's like, okay. And I'm like, have a great day. He's like, you too. Like, you could see he was like almost disappointed, Steve, that I didn't like pour some fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
Like, I think about that guy often. Anyway. I love that. I love that the maturity happens, and being willing to be like, I'm sorry, not my intent. It goes back to what you were saying earlier about most people are good people, and they're not even thinking about you. They're not trying to be a jerk. They're just It just was an accident.
They're just living their life.
Yeah.
And like Becky and I watch, I don't know if you guys ever watched Madam Secretary. Mm-hmm. It's a really good show. It's about the Secretary of State. Tay Leone plays the Secretary of State. And it was actually like they had consultants of people who actually worked in the State Department and former heads of state that were consulting on the show. So it's a very realistic show. And the great thing about the show is that it shows government in a way where it's like, there's very few actual bad people who are elected officials, but there's so many agendas and so many people who are just trying to do their own thing, and they all just kind of crash into each other. And
makes a mess.
Oftentimes it's a mess.
Yeah.
And so there's no bad guys in the show. It's just them having to deal with, okay, well, we need to do these things, and these are good things. And I think that life is so much like that. It's just all of these things crashing into each other. And people with their agendas, and we use agenda as a negative oftentimes, but we all have agendas in our lives, and most of the time it's just to survive.
Yeah.
But you have all of these people trying to survive and trying to thrive, and it just crashes into each other. And if we can realize that, then it's easier to grant people that space to just be themselves and to sometimes lose their crap in the middle of the post office and allow them to do it and not think bad of them. And just be like, okay, I hope that you have a better day. I can't change that. But I remember when he walked out, like everybody in the post office was just like,
what the heck,
dude? And they saw him in a certain way, and I saw him in a certain way where it was like, I hope I never meet that guy again.
Yeah.
But then everyone in the post office felt that same way. They're like, I hope I never see that guy ever again. And I don't ever want to leave a room where people are thinking that.
Yeah.
Where they're like, well, I hope I never see him again. Holy crap.
Glad he's gone.
Because that, I think, is the ultimate failure in life. And going back to home, if I'm creating that in my home, if I'm creating the sort of thing where my kids don't want me around, then that's a massive failure. Yeah. And I've created those moments. I've created those moments in my home. I think we all have, because we're all human.
Yeah.
But then you've got to give yourself that grace and say the same thing that I say to my kids. You made a marvelous mistake.
A marvelous mistake.
And here's a great example. 2 weeks ago, I'm mopping the floor, and my 6-year-old is throwing a fit, and he's having this massive hard time. And I got mad, and I just smacked the mop, because it was one of those plastic mops, smacked it against the floor, and I was like, Dashiell, get down here right now. When I smacked it against the floor, the thing shattered. And I was just like, suddenly I'm looking at this mop that I have just broken on the floor. Like I'm a 5-year-old that I just,
temper tantrum, anger.
Yeah. And I know that because it broke, my daughters are now terrified that dad's hugely angry, which I wasn't, but it was embarrassing for me. And so I had to sit down with him and say, I'm really sorry about that. Oh, and guess who gets to buy a new mop out of their fun money? I do.
Yeah.
Just like if you had broken it in your anger, you'd have to pay for it out of your fun money. You wouldn't be buying a doll, you'd be buying a mop. Well, guess who doesn't get to buy an action figure? Your dad, because I got to buy a mop. And I had to admit that and say I'm sorry and tell them I made a marvelous mistake.
A marvelous mistake.
I like that.
I'm going to take that. That's a good one. Well, Steven, as we wrap up here, we've covered a lot of territory. We've talked about a lot of great things, from parenting to karma, the things that you get and you give. What is the one thing that it's important that, because we have an amazing tribe here at American Masterminds. We've got some great listeners and fans that tune in because they know they're going to take something of value from a podcast. What is one thing that you would like to share that's kind of been on your mind, or something that is important to you that we needed to tell this tribe? I
think the thing that I go back to is people need to tell their stories, because of the fact that is who we are. All the things that happen to us create us. And we need to be comfortable sharing the light and the dark, being authentic, and realizing that our stories can change the world around us. They can change the people around us. They can inspire people. They can help people to overcome their own pain and their own traumas. I was doing an interview just recently and with a guy named Robert Boutner, and he's amazing. He wrote a book, and I was doing a video for him. And he said something that I felt was very profound that I've been sharing a lot lately, is that he was able to take his pain and turn it into art because he decided to tell his story. And that's all you're doing, is you're taking your pain, you're taking your mistakes, you're taking your triumphs, and you're turning it into art. as you tell your story, as you open up and you share it with the people around you in any way, whether you're writing a book, whether you're paying somebody to write a book, whether you're just talking like we are and sharing your thoughts. You're taking all that and you're making art out of it. And it might be temporary art because it's just us talking. Like, this is art that we're creating, and it'll disappear into the ether. It exists in this moment, but that doesn't mean that it's any less impactful because it's transitory art. And people need to understand that their stories have value. And when we're gone, that story's gone. And so we need to tell it, and we need to be confident in telling it. We can't apologize for the things that we've done or the things that's been done to us. We just have to accept and say, this is my story. It has value because I have value, and I need to share it because my story will change the world around me. It will change the people around me. And so that's what I would say is tell your story, whatever it is, whenever you can. Sit down with people and don't be afraid to share it. And don't be afraid to share the pain. Don't be afraid to share any of that stuff because all you're becoming in that moment is an artist. And if you think of it that way, an artist, no matter what they're doing, is always creating something beautiful because they're creating something that didn't exist before. Whether it's good art or it's bad, I don't know what art is, but I know what I like. Art is the creation. A house is art. It was something that didn't exist before, and now it exists. A doodle on a paper. We are creators, and when we tell our stories, we just aid the act of creation. And it is something that is beautiful. And so I would say, share your story and be proud of it.
Wow. Woo. That's so good. Well, American Mastermind fans and tribe, listen, thanks for tuning in today. We're grateful that you showed up. I hope that you can take something away from this podcast. I certainly have taken notes. There's a book that I'm going to go get, and The Dream Forgers. If you want to find Steven, please look in the notes, read the books. The characters in the books are compelling enough that I think about Mr. Baller on a regular basis. And that's something. I read a lot of books, and there's very few characters that I think about regularly. Thanks for being on our podcast. Thanks for contributing and bringing such wisdom and such a great story. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. This was an absolute pleasure.
Truly, thank you.